All right, Larry Krueger here at Levi's Stadium on Tuesday before Thanksgiving, the lone media day before Niners take on the Seahawks on Thanksgiving. Now, there was a lot to talk about today. Let's go into it. Of course, we're brought to you by Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Check them out in Emeryville and Corte Madera. They're open 7 days a week from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. or until they run out. Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Also, this video is brought to you by Mojo Fantasy. Loving Mojo Fantasy. Check that link in the description, and you can make sure you type in the promo code KRUEG, K-R-U-E-G, and they'll match you for your first $100. And everybody who enters automatically is entered into a drawing to win a Bosa or a Purdy jersey that will be given away after Niners Seahawks Thursday night. After the Thanksgiving Day extravaganza. All right, let's talk about a bunch of things going on down here in Santa Clara today. First, let's get into the injuries. Talanoa Hufanga, as you know, torn ACL. He is done for the year, so Ji'Ayir Brown will draw the start at strong safety. Aaron Banks was limited today in practice. He's got the turf toe. He still may play in Seattle. We'll find out. He's questionable at this point. If he doesn't play left guard, I would expect John Feliciano to play left guard. Spencer Burford has a knee injury, and he did not practice today, so no Burford. And as far as, who's going to take his place, that's going to be any number of different guys. Kyle Shanahan, didn't indicate exactly who it's going to be. It could be Jalen Moore. Could be Ben Barch, who they just signed, though I doubt that. They're probably not going to start Barch. Corey Luciano's a practice squad guy. Jesse Davis, Il Manning, Henry Bird. The Niners have their options, but none of those guys necessarily have any real experience. So that is going to be interesting if Burford can't play. Kyle did say that if the game was on Sunday, he thinks Burford would be able to go, but that because it's a Thursday, that he probably will not be able to go. So we'll see about who starts at right guard for the 49ers. That's a major question going into game day. The Niners did, as I just mentioned, sign Ben Barch off Jacksonville's practice squad. He was a fourth-round pick who played at a Division III school, St. John's, in the state of Minnesota. He's a Pacific Northwest kid who's been in the league a few years now. He's got 20 NFL starts, including 3 this year. Really interesting story. The guy was a high school wide receiver. Then he started off at college at tight end. He gained 75 pounds through a really unique diet that he had with all kinds of calories and eggs and peanut butter and everything else. He's now 6'6", 315 pounds, had an injury last year. But this is a guy who I think could potentially be a 49er for years to come. He's got a lot of talent. He's a young developmental offensive lineman, but he's got some experience. And there's a lot to like. Good tackle length and good demeanor. This guy looked good in the Senior Bowl the year he came out. He's established himself in the NFL. I was a little surprised he was on Jacksonville's practice squad, but he's working back from a serious injury a year ago. And you're probably going to see Ben Barch at some point later on this year. I don't think you're going to see him necessarily Thursday night, but you may see him in a Niner uniform later on in the season. The Niners will be wearing their all-white throwback jerseys and uniforms in Seattle, which is Brock Purdy's favorite jersey, and should be fun to watch. I love those jerseys as well. It's a really clean look. Let's talk a little bit about Brock Purdy. The great John Chapman had this tweet today that Brock Purdy is number 1 in the NFL in quarterback rating, number 1 in the NFL in QBR, number 1 in completion percentage, number 1 in touchdown percentage, number 1 in passing success rate, number 1 in yards per attempt, number 1 in adjusted yards per attempt, number 1 in yards per completion, number 1 in net yards per attempt, number 1 in adjusted net yards per passing attempt, number 1 in passer rating under pressure, number 1 in completion percentage under pressure, and number 1 in yards per attempt under pressure. Safe to say Brock Purdy's playing pretty well at this point. He has 18 touchdowns, 5 picks. He's completing 70% of his passes, and he's probably in the MVP discussion. And he's playing behind a 49er offensive line that is ranked 28th in pass block win rate. So he's playing behind an offensive line that's not necessarily stellar, and yet he's found a way to be number one in all these categories, despite the fact there's tons of people that don't believe in him still. Brian Baldinger, who counts himself as a believer, said, Brock's got a great feel. Just great feel for the game. He knows how to play. He's been sensational. He had a perfect quarterback rating against Tampa Bay. The last 49er to do that was Joe Montana in 1989. So, it's safe to say Brock's playing really, really well. And that's an exciting thing for the 49ers for sure. A couple other notes from Shanahan. He said that Ray McLeod's got a rib injury. He was limited in practice today. Javon Hargrave has got a thumb injury. He was limited in practice today. Shamar Jean-Charles has a shoulder injury. And all three of these guys were limited today in practice. I already talked a little bit about the right guard options. If you ask me who do I think is going to play right guard, I would guess Jalen Moore. But there's always a chance for Ilm Manning, who is a college left tackle but has talent and can play right guard. Henry Bird, Jesse Davis, Corey Luciano, Ben Barch. Those are the other options. My guess is it would be Jalen Moore or Ilm Manning playing right guard if Spencer Burford can't go. Kyle was asked about Jason Verrett. He said that Jason Verrett has not signed yet, that the 49ers would like to sign him, but it just hasn't happened yet. Now, that could be any number of things. It could be he didn't pass his physical. He's had a number of physical issues. It could be a money situation where he wants bonus money they're not willing to give. But they would like to sign him, but they haven't signed him as of yet. And you will not see him in Seattle playing for the 49ers this weekend. I asked Kyle about what kind of game plan are we going to see this week as far as is it going to be a full game plan? Fred Warner kind of suggested that it may be a condensed game plan. And Kyle said he kind of agreed that he'll go through his plays offensively and defensively, and they'll put things in and take things out as they see fit, but that it's likely to be somewhat of a condensed game plan, volume-wise, on both sides of the line of scrimmage. He was asked about Pete Carroll's teams, and he talked about how Pete Carroll's teams are incredibly competitive. They practice hard. He thinks they're very similar in makeup to the 49ers team itself. He was asked about DK Metcalf and just talked about the explosiveness of Metcalf and compared him to Julio Jones and Andre Johnson. Also talked about how Tyler Lockett is a really savvy route runner and that he's a very confident receiver. When he was asked about Geno Smith, Kyle said that he's good at taking what the defense gives you. So in other words, he's patient. He's a veteran quarterback who's patient. He also talked about Devin Witherspoon, the rookie corner at Illinois, said that he's really had an impact in every aspect of the game. He was also asked about Tayshaun Gibson and in relation to getting Ji'Ayir Brown ready, and he just said that Gibson's, that veteran that really all the players look up to, and that he's had a huge impact in helping get Ji'Ayir Brown ready to go. Kyle talked about how they may need more safety depth before the end of the year just because of the number of players they're going through there now. And I asked him about Zach Charbonnet, the running back for the Seahawks, who's going to step in for Kenneth Walker because of the injury that Walker sustained to his oblique. And he just said that, that Charbonnet is really good at catching screen passes. He felt like the Niners were better last week, not great, but better at defending the screen passes. We then went into the open locker room and talked to Nick Bosa. Bosa said he was asked about his sleep pattern. He says he goes to bed, he gets 9 hours of sleep every night. He goes to bed before 9 p.m., and he gets a good night's sleep. He limits his caffeine intake and doesn't eat a few hours before he goes to bed. He said he really loves having Chase Young on this line, that it provides really good energy. He was asked about how the 49ers can defeat Geno Smith, and he said you got to make him play quarterback, take away the run, take away the quick game, and make him go through his progressions. A lot of the same things that he said about Trevor Lawrence a couple weeks back. He mentioned that Seattle probably runs the most bootlegs of any team in the NFL, and that the Niners are preparing to defend the bootleg. Talked about how this is a huge division opponent and how the Niners look at it, it's almost like a double game. So they put twice the importance on these division games. And then he also talked about Eric Armstead and how Armstead was great against Tampa. And Bosa said that he thought that Armstead's pass rush effort was the best he's seen from him all year in that Tampa game. Then we moved on, talked to Ji'Ayir Brown. Ji'Ayir acknowledged that this is his first primetime game as a starter. About last week, he was asked about how he played last week. He said he liked how poised he was at the catch point. Thought that was kind of interesting. He expects to be challenged right away by Seattle on Thursday night, and he's prepared for that challenge. He said he talked to Hufanga and wished him the best, and just said how disappointed Hufanga is, and they traded conversation back and forth after the win over Tampa the other night. He says that he really leans on his defensive backfield coach and some of the veterans in the room for questions when he's watching the film. But he also mentioned that he feels like he was really prepared well at Penn State by the great Manny Diaz, who's a phenomenal defensive coach in his own right. Then we went and talked to Debo Samuel, and he just talked about how Devin Witherspoon is just a fast, twitchy guy, and he's looking forward to the matchup. Brandon Ayuk, we talked to him. He also says that Witherspoon jumps off the tape when you watch him. And then when he was asked about Brock Purdy, and he just said that Brock has a great feel for his receivers and their tendencies. And that just comes with reps. We talked to George Kittle. He said he's really excited to play on Thanksgiving. He said there's a lot of eyeballs on you, and that kind of makes it more exciting. We talked to Brock Purdy. He says he has all the confidence in the world in Brandon Ayuk. He loves how Brandon gets separation. He thinks he's one of the most underrated wide receivers in the NFL, and obviously talked up all of his receivers, but he was asked specifically about Ayuk. And then he said that Ayuk really, that the way he gets on the same page with his receivers is reps, just reps. He gets to know their tendencies and where they like the ball and how they run their routes and how they get into their breaks and how they get out of their breaks, and just all the nuances of timing are things that he works on with reps with his receivers. And he also mentioned that throwing with anticipation is absolutely a huge part of his game, and so he absolutely leans on those reps to get into a good rapport. He also talked a little bit about he does think that his throwing routine has strengthened his arm in recent weeks. I asked him the question. I said, "What exactly do you do between series in the middle of games?" And he says, he comes off the field, he sits down, takes his helmet off, he looks at his iPad, and then he talks to Brian Greasy about what Greasy's seeing in real time. And then he emphasized that he breathes a little bit and that they take breathing very seriously, and that they got a whole routine about how they take their breathing seriously to get them in a better spot mentally. And he says, I just get my mind right for that next series. And it was kind of interesting hearing him go through what his process is in game. And then, he admitted that the deep ball success that the Niners have had in recent weeks has definitely opened up some of the stuff underneath in the intermediate and short game. I thought that was really interesting, hearing Brock kind of admit that, the deep ball success they've had has really helped their short game quite a bit. Then we talked to Steve Wilks, and he says that, guys are really focused on the short week. He says the key to winning on the short week is fundamentals and technique and taking care of your body in the lead up to the game. He says it's absolutely vital in the short week. He says they're going to miss Talanoa Hufanga, but he's got tons of confidence in Ji'Ayir Brown. He thought Ji'Ayir Brown's first game was incredibly exciting. He said Jair's very confident, and I think he's going to be fine. And then he mentioned how that he's got a lot of confidence in both Ji'Ayir Brown and D. Winters, that if either of those guys had to play, that he feels confident that they're ready to play. Winters is clearly ahead of Graham at this point at linebacker, at least according to the 49ers, and Brown obviously is going to start this week in place of Talanoa Hufanga. And then Wilks also talked about how Eric Armstead did really well against Tampa, and he thought it was Armstead's best performance of the year. And then I had a chance to do a little one-on-one sit-down in the locker room with Colton McKivitz and Jake Brendel. And, what do you do with offensive linemen? You talk food. So we talked Thanksgiving, and we talked about Colton loves his butterball turkey. He says, I got to get the butterball. Very specific about his turkey. We also found out that in a dinner for the offensive line that Colton McKivitz ate like 5 slabs of prime rib. And we had to have Charlie Warner verify it. He's like, yeah, man, it was thick too. So Brendel says that he eats a lot, but he's looking forward to cornbread. He says he really loves the cornbread. I asked Colton what are his favorite sides for Thanksgiving. He said buttered noodles, and then Brendel proceeded to rip McKivitz for liking buttered noodles. But offensive linemen can flat out eat. Thanksgiving in a lot of ways is an offensive lineman's dream. All right, that's the story from down here in Santa Clara. Thanks to Pig and a Pickle for being the title sponsor of the Krug Show. Thanks to Mojo Fantasy for sponsoring us as well. Make sure you check that link in the description and type in Krug in the promo code at Mojo Fantasy, and they will match you your first $100. And everybody who does it automatically is entered into a chance to win a Bosa or a Purdy jersey, which we'll give away on Thanksgiving night in the post game. So, and thanks to all you guys for supporting the Krug Show on YouTube.